Welcome, everybody, to Navigating New Transitions in International Education. We're happy to welcome you here. This is the time for getting ready for the job cycle and the possibilities of thinking about what is happening for the next year and whether that's looking at another international school posting somewhere else or if you're considering moving back home. Either way, it's a time of thinking about those possibilities, even though the new school year has just begun for most of us, especially if we're working in the Northern Hemisphere. But it is nevertheless time to get thinking about the next school year for 25-26 school year. I'd like to, uh, along with a co-host here is Jess Gosling, who is one of our the author as well in becoming a successful international teacher. She's an educator with a lot of experience working abroad, has written a terrific book about how to go about finding jobs and thinking about it from a lot of different perspectives. She's from the UK, and so she has a lot of perspectives from the British point of view, and as well, she is a wife and mother, and so she understands what it means to be moving with a family to new countries and new locations. And so she is going to be able to offer a lot of good insight for our people here today joining us. And Amy Perrier Morin, who is a very experienced international educator as well. I worked with Amy. She and I worked together many years ago here in China, and she has written a fantastic book called Living Expatations about repatriating back home. She, while living abroad and living in Vietnam, met her husband to be, and they moved to the United States, and so she has repatriated back to the US, but her husband is not an American. And so he is still continuing his expat dreams, but in this case, by living in the US. And she has written her book about what that experience is like and returning home. And so that's a very important consideration about reverse culture shock and all of that. I'm Kelly Writings, and I have written the book Teach or Lead Abroad, Easily Find Your Dream Job in International Schools. I've worked abroad for off and on for almost 20 years now, and I've worked in several different countries and been in China since 2012. This is now my home base, and this is where I live. I actually have just retired from working in schools, but I still work in education. I'm an educational consultant and have my own firm that I work with called EduNet Pro Consulting. And so we've all written books. We're all excited about this topic of international education and the different aspects that are part of it. And so we're glad that you've been able to join us, and we hope that we're going to be able to offer you some interesting insights and ideas about what the navigating to the next steps might look like for you as you consider your uh, next possibilities as we move into the 25-26 school year. We're right now in the middle of our introduction and our welcome. We're going to have some different topics that we'll each talk about. And so I'll be an overview of the process about the hiring process and what that looks like, particularly looking at it from the point of view of an administrator, since that's what I've spent the last almost 20 years in helping people to find jobs and to get them hired within the schools where I've worked. Jess is going to be then presenting about working within the British school system and internationally, and what life is like as an international teacher, particularly focusing as well, as I mentioned a bit at the top of the introduction, about the working with or being part of a family and coming abroad with family. Then finally, Amy is going to be talk about repatriation and rebuilding a meaningful life back home. Back home for her is in the US, but back home can be anywhere for people, wherever they happen to come from in the world. And at some point in time, most likely, many of us do go back to our homes, if even for a short time, but who knows, what happens, and all kinds of things happen. I've already told you a little bit about myself. I've worked in international education now for nearly 2 decades, off and on. I've been mostly in Asia, but I began my career internationally when I first started working in Mexico. So and then I've been back and forth. So, sort of like Amy's topic about going back home, I've done that a couple of different times in my career. I've spent 32 years working in international education. And so now I've just retired. And so I'm working out of China in my own firm, EduNet Pro, which is a consulting firm. And I also offer courses that are based on my book topics. I write on topics about hiring and also about educational leadership. So I have spent a lot of time then in working on these different topics, and hiring is something that is particularly important to me. And so I'm really glad to be able to share with you here today about that. So, thinking about your dream job and what you want to do as you are planning, and it takes time to be able to do that. And so you've got to put your mindset as to what you want to do to get ready for that job. So the first thing is you've got to put your time into making this happen. Getting your job is not going to just happen right. It doesn't, like, you just wake up and it magically comes there in front of you. It's going to have to be something that you put the effort into making it happen. You've got to do a lot of different things to make that possible. Jacqueline, welcome. We're glad to see you here. And so you've got to prepare for the process, and that's what you've got to set your mindset to make that happen. And preparing for the process means that you've got to do it step by step, each of the different parts, to be ready for this. Because once you get into the actual interviewing stages and all the different parts that are part of that, it will be a bit of a challenge for you, because there's a lot of things can happen very quickly. And most of you are probably working, teaching in the school year as well, and or doing your other jobs that you have. And so it's going to be hard to do that if you're not prepared early on in the process. You also want to get your mindset about investing in yourself and the process. And this is something that's really very important. If it's your dream, you want to realize that. And so I know for me that I have always had this interest in living abroad, even when I was very young and as a boy. And my family had actually considered moving to Australia, and I remember even at a very young age thinking, wow, that's really exciting. And when they decided not to do that, I was kind of like, oh, a little bit disappointed because that didn't happen. So even way back then, I had that as part of my dream, but I realized that I had to invest in myself in order to make this happen, to make all the things possible so that I can find jobs anywhere in the world, and you can do that too. In order to be prepared to do this, when you're in that interview process, it's going to be important to think like a recruiting leader. And so perhaps you're teaching, maybe you're a administrator, but you've got to get into the mindset of what does that recruitment leader who you are trying to introduce yourself to, what do they want in the process? What are they looking for in the people that they're trying to hire? So a recruitment leader could be an agent that you're working with, but it could be the person who's in the school who's hiring, the principal or assistant principal or some department head or whoever it is that's interviewing you from the school. They're a recruitment leader. What are they going to think about? And so you've got to put yourself in the mindset of what they want to hear. And not that you're trying to answer inauthentically, but you want to put together information and have it available so that they can easily make a decision about you. And wow, you're the kind of person that they want to bring into the school to join them and to join their team. And so you have to think a little bit about them and what they want in the process. And finally, that brings you to the end goal. And what is the end goal? And most of us are, as teachers and educators, we're used to planning our classroom lessons. We think about the end product in mind. We do sometimes it's referred to as backward planning or understanding by design. You're thinking about what is it that you want your students to learn. Well, in this case, what is it that you want in your job, and as you begin thinking about working abroad or going back home or whatever it is that you're looking for the next school year? What is the end goal, and what is it that you can do to put that in place so that you can be successful in your process as you're moving ahead in planning what you're doing? So now, as we look to the next slide, think about the process, because this is the beginning of our international school hiring cycle for most schools around internationally around the world. So the beginning phases tend to be, it's a little bit fluid. So it's not like a hard and fast, this is where it stops, this is where, or where it begins, this is where it ends, but rather usually around August, September, that's the beginning phases. So schools are figuring out what kind of openings that they have. You as a candidate are thinking about, how do I put together all of my documents, everything that I need in order to have it available quickly, so that when somebody asks me for providing passport pages, I've got it all right there. If I need to share a marriage license, or if I've got to share my son's birth certificate, then I've easily got everything together in a quick, easy to access way. This is the time to begin doing it before you get into the minutia of all the interviewing in it, because that can be a very fast process. The peak process for the hiring is going to be basically kind of right around October through January. And so right now, most schools are getting ready, if they're going to do international job fairs, in-person job fairs, and online job fairs. They're going to start happening this month, and they will extend through around January. And so that's when most of the jobs are going to be available. But that is, by far and away, is not all the jobs that are available. And so you have an opportunity all year long to be working toward finding a job. But most candidates and most jobs will be open right around that time in the peak. In the midpoint is going to be around February to March. And so that's when there'll be not as many jobs. There won't be as many candidates available. It's after the holiday seasons are over, but there's still going to be some jobs. Some people from the holiday time are going to have gone home, and they're going to, or think a little bit during that, and they might go, I thought I was going to come back, but I've decided to change my mind. I'm not going to do it. So there might be some new openings that come up in that time. So you want to be prepared and be ready to be able to take advantage of that when that happens. Then finally, the late part of the season is around April until around July. It actually can even go into August in some cases, though most schools don't want to do that, but it happens. And so even there, you might find jobs. In that late period, you might find some people who at the very end of the school year will say, yeah, I've got to go back home. I've got to go somewhere else. Something else has happened. I've got a health emergency, whatever it is. And so there may be openings that come open then. And so you want to be ready for that if you're still out in the market. And so this is what the hiring cycle looks like. So I spoke a moment ago about all the different things you want to gather together. So here is a list of all the different types of documents you want to think about putting together as you're preparing for the beginning stage of your job search. The most important thing is your resume or your CV that you have. The cover letter is also a very important document. You want to put a lot of time investing into making that document really, or both those documents, sing about who you are. And you want to make sure that it represents you very, very thoroughly. But you also want to think about these other documents, and it's not going to be that you're going to send them all to a job recruiter, but you're going to have them available so when they ask for them within the cycle, that you have them ready. Typically, you're going to just start off by providing your resume and usually a cover letter to go with your initial contact with a school. And if they are interested in you as a candidate, they're going to ask for these other documents. Also, when you fill out applications with schools, they may ask you for certain documents. So you provide them as needed, but you've got them all available for you, because, and there may be some of these things you won't need to provide to the school, but you'll be ready if you do. And so this is gets you started on that part of the process. So now think about, I mentioned before the stages, the four stages of the hiring cycle: the beginning, the peak, the midpoint, and the late stage. And so you want to use a number of different resources to help you in your search, but there's a lot of things that you could be looking at, and it's too much to do all at once, and it might even be overwhelming if you've never used any of these before. And so I recommend that you use different resources at different stages of this process, because each of these resources, some are going to be more valuable for you at different times in the hiring cycle. So the types of resources we're talking about are the large scale international job site. That is going to be one that has a lot of different jobs with a lot of different schools around the globe that they are looking at. A mid-size recruitment site is going to be one that maybe works with several different schools, but it's a little bit smaller, it's a little more intimate. A regional or national recruiter specialists are going to be ones that hire for a specific country, or maybe they're just focused on the Middle East, for example, or they're just focused on China and Thailand and Vietnam, for example. So there's that would be the smaller national regional recruiter. LinkedIn, if many of you are on LinkedIn, that is a great site as well for finding positions throughout the year in different ways. School websites themselves generally have also employment opportunity pages, though not always, but often that they do. But those are going to take a lot more time because you have to apply to each one of those individually. And then also there are specialty subject sites. So, for example, maybe you have a part of a recruiting, I mean, you're part of a agency, for example, like um, your counselor association that you belong to, or you're a member of a PE teachers association, and they post positions that are there. So I suggest that when you start off your process, you want to get into developing your profile on the large scale sites first. And so I really would suggest you probably have about two different large scale sites that you're on. So maybe you do ISS and Scroll, or you're doing um, some other sites as well that you want to be part of. Those are okay to be able to do. Um, Maybe you're part of Search Associates or others as well. So, all any of those, but you just two is probably all you want to get started with to get going. Then you want to do that in the beginning phase. Then, as you're moving into the peak, you could begin working on developing some of your mid-sized international recruiting resources, maybe one or two of those that you want to do. And so you just focus on one at a time and get that done. And then when you finish that one, move on to the next one and begin working on that. You can begin developing your LinkedIn at any point during this process. I would recommend you get it going early on that and begin developing your presence there. And then also, if you have particular dream schools in mind that you want to work for, and particularly if you were very focused on being in one particular location, like you must work in Germany, and that's really very important for you, then you can go into the school sites and start trying to apply there. But those school sites can end up eating up a lot of your time and applying because you're just applying to one thing and it's sort of a guess whether you're going to get in or not because they may or may not have a position for you. And so you want to really just focus on the ones that are the most important for you. You could also begin developing your presence on the sites for those international or for the specific job specialties, but probably those positions aren't going to be posted, I think, and more until toward the later part of the cycle when they might schools are more interested because right now they're focused on the big thing, which is the big recruiters and the mid-size recruiters more than anything. In the midpoint, you then want to begin focusing on developing some of these other sites that I mentioned, and there's some targets there, what I suggest that you look for. I wouldn't really do much more than just one regional recruiter. Probably you don't need to do too many more than that. And that's only if you really are highly interested in a specific region and area. And so keep looking at those school websites. If you just really have your heart set on working in Kuala Lumpur and there's a school that matches what you want to do, then keep looking at there. And who knows, there may be a position that will come up. If you put in your application, that's fine, and you just keep looking. And late in the cycle as well, you just keep looking, you keep revisiting that. You'll notice though that those large scale sites, probably by the end of the midpoint in the late cycle, they're not going to be too much change going on there. So I wouldn't put as much energy into developing those profiles much more because most of their jobs have already been done. They've already held their job fairs and they're mostly just going to be a few positions available. So put your energy into the other specialty areas that are mentioned there, the specialty in the midterm, or mid-size and regional recruiters. So here, think about what does the hiring workflow look like? So the first part is the exploration phase, and that's what you're doing right now. You're thinking about what it is that you need to do to get ready for this process. The second phase is going to start pretty soon, and that's going to be the interviewing phase. And so here's where you're going to connect in with a school. You're going to have an interview, but first thing you want to do is prepare for that interview. You want to research the school. You want to get ready to figure out what it is that they are looking for, and then you develop your application with them and your interview so that you can help to address their key needs and how you answer those questions and help solve the problems that they have and the types of people that they're looking for. In the third phase of the interviewing and hiring process, you're going to be then getting you talk to people within the school. You might have some questions that you want to figure out answers to. They also are going to have questions about you as a candidate that they might want to explore either. Are you the right fit for them? Are you the right fit for them? Are they the right fit for you? And so you're going to, each of you, be looking at each of these different things. It's what I call chasing flags. It's trying to figure out, is this the right place to be? And so you want to invest your time into doing this. And if you've got a nagging feeling that this isn't the right place, this is the time to figure that out, if that means something for you or not. Because if you wait until after you've started working there and you've moved to the new country and you've moved into the new school, that's not the time to figure out like, oh yeah, I wish I hadn't done that. And so that's a time to really explore what that means and address all of those concerns. Doesn't mean you're going to have to love everything about the school, and they're not going to have to love everything about you, but is this a thing where you can mutually agree upon and get benefit and enjoy working together? That's what you're looking for. And then the final phase is the final decision. And when that happens, when you get an offer, then you really want to be quickly ready to be able to say yes or no. Sometimes candidates want to take a couple of weeks to make a decision, and that's not a good sign. You should already know by the time that offer comes. You should be pretty clear about whether you want that or not, and you just take a few days to make a decision if you need to talk it over with your family or think it over deeply. But really, 2-3 days is about the most that you need, and then just make the decision. You don't need to agonize over it. If it's right, you'll know it, and if it isn't right, then listen to it. If you just feel like this doesn't work, then listen to your heart and make that decision. So it's all part of this process in the hiring decision. It's a big stage to have to go through the whole thing. And it's one that we're here to help to talk about tonight. And if there's things that I can do to help you as you're preparing for your search and thinking about what you want to do, please reach out to me. I'm glad to help and have a conversation with you. So with that, I'm going to turn it over now to Jess Gosling, who is going to offer her input in view about the hiring process from the point of view from the UK perspective a little bit, and as well as from the family perspective. So, Jess.
Hello. That was a fabulous introduction, Kelly. Thank you so much. And you did make me smile when you said about the decision and agonizing over the decision. I think that is really difficult for so many people, and especially when you are considering your family too, and maybe they have very different interests and needs to you as well. It's a little bit more tricky when the family's involved too. But I think you're absolutely right. If you feel in your gut that it's a good thing, just go for it. You can't agonize for a week over it.
That's right.
So yeah, thank you. So this is my book, Becoming a Successful International Teacher. I've got some ways of contacting me as well on here. So I've got my Twitter handle, Jess Gosling2. I'm very active on Twitter, so you can post any questions regarding this or any other things with international teaching there. I've got a Facebook page, and this is actually the QR code for the Facebook page. So you can scan that and join up if you would like. Now, the book really came from the Facebook page and group because I had, I think around at that point about 1,500 people who were joining, and they had lots of questions, and I was kind of answering the same question a lot. And I thought, well, if I make a guide that will support people, like a very practical guide, like it is a step-by-step guide on how to get a job and how to do well once you're there. I thought this would be an easier way of containing all that information. So if you want to join, please do. No question is too small, and we're a very friendly group. It's one of the joining questions. You have to be kind to be in this group, and you can't criticize or troll anyone. So it's a really open group to everybody, and I'd love you to join. And I have a web page, jessgoslingearlyyearsteacher.com. Could have maybe made it shorter when I made that name, but that has podcasts on there where I've talked about international teaching. It has all my articles. It has access to the book. It has my blog, and I'm blogging a lot now because, as I'll talk to you a bit more, I'm not actually teaching right at the moment. So it's changed my availability somewhat. So my why did I write this book? Well, I began the international journey for teaching in 2009. I did spend 2 years in the UK, and I do advise that for teachers, whatever country you're coming from, to start off doing 2 or 3 years to really understand how the system works. And this is great for when you're being interviewed as well, because you can show you have a real clear understanding of pedagogy and curriculum in your own country. Obviously, especially if it's, say, a school that's with the same curriculum. So I've spent over 10 years working worldwide, and out of that, 7 countries I've relocated to. One was as a EAL teacher, and the rest were teaching internationally, and one was as a student. So I've packed up and moved a lot in my life. People don't quite believe that I only ever move with one suitcase, but with a family of 3 now, 3 suitcases. I tend to just live quite frugally, and I'm not sentimental, so I don't take things with me. And this is quite a good way to move, I feel. Like, I do have friends who have shipped an awful lot of things, and this seems to cause a lot of stress and troubles. So if you can do it and you start off that way, and you don't gather too much as you travel, it's great. I recommend it. So I decided to write my book in 2021. I couldn't see any thorough resources available written by a teacher for teachers who are interested in this journey. I did not have any guide when I went to Egypt in 2009. I've made lots of mistakes on the way, so I thought it was a great idea to make something to support other people to not go through all these troubles and hardships, shall we say. I've also built up many experiences and contacts during my time, and I felt, with 11 years abroad, it was a good time to start writing. My book is really, I would say, strongly based in sociology. I've used a lot of different people's voices throughout the book, including my own. So it's very much the experience as if you were living it. So I think that that's quite helpful for people, because I think for a lot of people there's a big worry that everything's going to go wrong once they move abroad. And I think having lots of different experiences throughout the book kind of prove it otherwise, that this isn't going to happen. Um, and I also really am keen to share my knowledge to support others on their journey too, because I love working and teaching abroad, of course, and living abroad. So on to the next slide. Okay, so hopefully at the end of this little short chat, and it is very short, I'm afraid, there is more in the book, but just from this chat, I hope you'll know what to consider when moving abroad. You'll know some ways to apply for international teaching roles. Kelly had a great chart there. I love that, about where to apply at different times. So I will just especially talk from the British perspective and understand what makes a good offer. And it might not just be money, because that's what we always think about at the beginning, isn't it? But what will be a good offer for you as a person, as a family, as a couple. So, okay, so overview of my book. The green ones are what I'm going to talk about. So chapter 1, beginning your journey internationally. Chapter 2, how to apply, because I think this is most relevant to now. 3, preparations, arrival and settling in and thriving. We won't talk about those today. Chapter 6, the international teacher types and dependents. So chapter 1, considering the move. So it's really important, and Kelly did touch on this about research, but you really need to know in yourself if it's going to be a good move for you to go abroad. Like he said, he wanted to go to Australia as a child. I was backpacking from 15, just across the water to Ireland, but it was always in my blood, so to speak. I always wanted to do something where I lived and worked abroad. So I knew even when I did my teacher training that I would want to go abroad with my teaching certificate. So think about, are you the kind of person that loves the challenge? You love trips, you love planning them, you love new experiences, because these are the kind of people international teaching really suits. Where to move? That's a big question. Many of us think holiday destinations straight away, but in reality, when you often go to these places and you live there, it can be very, very different. So you've got to really think about what's important to you. Do you need all the malls, Western food, the kind of lifestyle you have at home, or do you want a more simple life where you're more rural environment? Perhaps less conveniences. Do you want to live by the sea? Do you like mountains? Do you need the outdoors? Because like the UAE, it's very much the weather is so intense, it's quite difficult to really go and do outdoorsy things there. So it's so important to think about where exactly to move. The physical environment's obviously something I talked about, but AQI as well. This came for me with a family particularly, and why we moved from Vietnam. That can be really high in some Asian countries and can impact on your standard of life, and also can impact on when you can go outside. So you want to look at that, and you can look on that online quite easily. Disaster zones. Are you happy living where there's earthquakes? So I've lived in an earthquake region twice in my life. I'm quite glad to not anymore. But it's like, is that going to frighten you? Is it something you can cope with? Something that's become really important to me as I've sort of got older and been to quite a few international placements now is your expectations. You've got to try and make sure your expectations are going to match what you receive. So from my perspective is that you really need to research the country, go visit if you can. That's really important. Try to connect with people already living there. So your expectation of the country isn't too high and you're not massively disappointed. Similar with the school, research your school as well, but we talk about that a bit more later as well. The culture, are you going to fit into? If it's a very religious culture, it might be different to what you're used to. It could be a very introverted culture where there's not much English spoken. Is that going to be difficult for you? Are you open to learning the language? Also healthcare, this is becoming more important to me as I get older, another joy. But do check that there are hospitals available to you, and you can match that as well when you look at your package, which I'll talk about later, with your insurance. How well covered are you for the healthcare? How expensive is it? Countries like Singapore, Hong Kong, it's very expensive for the healthcare there, so you want a really good package. And accessibility, I put that as well. Like where I currently live, you've got to drive basically. And you've got to look into that with each country. Often, when you work internationally, you're in a city, so it is quite well linked via transport, but sometimes not, depending on where the city is. So check that, because if you're someone that likes going out a lot, it might be difficult if you can't get around. There's also the horrendous situation of traffic over in Asia. So you could live in Bangkok. If you're not near the SkyTrain or a metro, it might take you 1 hour, 2 hours more to get into town. When I lived in Ho Chi Minh City, we had to rely on a taxi to get to the airport. If it rained, sometimes that taxi could take an hour longer than it was supposed to, or just get waterlogged and we get stuck sometimes for a while. So it's really a good idea to look at these different factors. Um, I think Kelly's covered really well on where to apply. I will just add one in that I think is really good for British schools, which is the Times Educational Supplement. That's one of the big organisations Kelly mentioned. For me, I've always used them. I've always got work through them. And don't forget, if you get a job right at the beginning of the cycle, you're not needing to use all the other little ones either. So I find that a very, very good place. You can put all your information on the one form. Basically, you fill out initially, and then you just add to that form for each subsequent school you join. Like, you will make a new cover letter, but they'll keep all the details from your CV, which I think is fantastic, because filling out forms again and again and again gets very exhausting. So things to consider, because I said I'm doing it more from the person angle, is what location is good for you in your situation now. As a single teacher, you might want somewhere that you can go out lots. And you also want to check too that the school has that kind of demographic, which is something you can easily ask either in an interview or when you speak to a teacher in the school before you move. Because a single person, you might not want the same thing as a family want. Family may want housing rather than an apartment. They might want to know there's other families in the school, because then obviously as teachers you can all connect quite easily. You have instant play dates with those children as well. You also want to know, and I'm relating to the school a little bit as well, if it is a family school, are they offering things like creche when you have inset? Like, are your children going to be supported when you can't be with them? Particularly as well as if you're a teaching couple, you need to know what you're going to be able to do with your children. Desirable locations as a couple, it maybe isn't going to change too much than a single person. But again, you've got to check that you both want the same from a location. I mean, if one of you loves cold places, the other loves hot, you're going to have to really compromise, or do one, take turns like I did. So you also have to look at the right fit as a school. And again, I'm going to emphasize this might be really from a perspective of you as a person, or in a couple, or in a family. There's lots of different types of schools. My book goes into these in quite detail, but just to give you a few ideas, there's schools that are bilingual schools, which some teachers love to put the children in bilingual systems. Some want English to be spoken the whole time while their children are in schools. Some schools you've got to also check what's the language of the playground, because that might be difficult for your own children, and the demographics of the school. Is it a diverse school? Because you want the language to be English as much as possible for your children, so at least initially, before they learn some of the language. There's boarding schools you can work at. Now, this, a lot of people really love boarding schools, but there's also the aspect that you may have to do sort of work outside of school hours, where you're supporting a group in the evening. They can do things in the weekends, because obviously the kids are there. So that's something you've got to think about. They do pay quite well, but something to have a thought about. Alternative schools, they do exist abroad as well. It could be a Steiner school, it could be Montessori, or it could be that they're coming off curriculum completely. If you are looking for different ways of working, there can be quite good places to research. There's religious schools abroad as well. And also, just to touch a tiny bit on tiers of school, this is quite I would say contested. They're something we call tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, with tier 1 being the top, most desirable schools. These are usually the schools that are very, very well established, have great well-being programs for their teachers, have very high salaries, and people often want to go for these schools. But then there's lower tier schools, we say tier 2, tier 3, that are possibly trying to work towards this level. And it doesn't necessarily mean that the top schools are going to be the best ones either, just to make life a bit more difficult, depending on what you want. because your real thing, the best thing to do is to really research from people who are in the school and ask them what the school is like. Continue with applications. So in my experience recently, and I've applied for work 2 years ago, and then we applied again this year, that we're not really being asked for CVs. Often having for each school to fill in an application form, or if you go on TES and you fill in one big one and then do a cover letter. But I would still say to make a bare bones CV, because what I always do is just cut and paste across to the application form to save you a bit of time. Also, you will have to do a cover letter. I know Kelly's mentioned that as well. Now, there's no point really prepping a cover letter. You could put some very basic things in about your philosophy, perhaps, but for every application you do, you need to tailor your cover letter to the school specifically. You've got to look at their mission statements and look really at the job specification and make sure you're really answering what they're looking for. You have to sound like the school. It sounds a funny way to say, but in interview as well, sound like the school. Look at their website and find words they're using, and then you look like you're going to fit in. But it is an idea to get these things just in the bare bones prepped before you start to apply. So like I say here, consider you've got to, if you are sending a CV in, that has to also be changed every time for each school to make sure you're matching the person's specification. And in your cover letter, give evidence to them as well. Why should they hire you out of everyone else? It's not really very good just to say, I'm really good with EAL children, full stop. You have to give an example of what you've done with those children. Perhaps you've done a scheme or something to really support them and move them on. You should be giving evidence in your cover letter as well. And make cover letter maximum 2 pages. Doesn't need to be a massive essay. 1 page is fine, but 2 pages maximum. Same with your CV. Consider also when you're going through your applications, questions you want to ask in the interview. This will be really important, especially if you're thinking about your family and what they need. And also, if you've got a partner you're bringing and maybe they're not working, you need to find out things like, are they able to get a work visa over there? Because if it is something they really want to do, then they might become quite unhappy if they can't actually work. And then the the offer as well, I'm going to speak about a little bit more on the next page. So you have had your interview, got through, and now you get an offer. And this is probably the most difficult time, I think, that I find for myself, because maybe you've made a lot of applications and you're at this point where you're just exhausted from it and you just think, I'm just going to go to the next school because it's too much. Or you really liked the SLT and you think, well, this could be a great place, or maybe the salary is a problem or this is a problem. So you really have to weigh it up for your own circumstances, your offer. What I would say is look very carefully at first of all, look at the contract dates. Often in interview, they'll say it's 2-year contract, and you look at the dates and it might be less than 2 years, which will mean effectively you're paid less. So check the contract dates. Check that healthcare is included, and if you have a family or any other dependents, check that they're covered as well, and ask to see the healthcare plan, so if you've got any pre-existing conditions or anything you're concerned about, if it's going to be covered or not. There may be a probation period, so find out about that. And perhaps probe a bit as in, what would happen if I'm not taken on. Think about also ECAs. So some schools offer, well, most international schools offer activities after school for the children. You may be asked to do 1 or 2 or more ECAs, and sometimes these can be at weekends as well. So it's well worth to ask what the expectation is. And I'd also add in to ask about your PPA allowance as well. On average, in my experience, I've had around 5 hours per week PPA. Early years gets less generally, which is completely unfair, but it's the way it is. But it can be up to 10 hours. Like some schools, they're teaching 3 or 4 periods a day. So you want to find out that expectation for non-contact time. If you have dependents, I've already mentioned, find out about creche and inset, but you also want to find out any other fees. Sometimes you get free like allowance for your dependent, for your child to be in the school. But we're finding more and more now, and particularly Europe, this isn't always the case, and you're paying a certain amount for your child to be in the school. And if it's a private international school, that can be quite high. So find out if they're paid for, and find out also if you pay tax or not on that, because that can also deduct from your salary. And certainly in Singapore, that can be quite a lot of money. Ask about trips and uniforms and whether you have to pay for the lunches. In a previous school, I had to pay for the lunches and they weren't cheap. So it's another thing to factor into your salary. Perks of the package should include healthcare. They should include flights, and I'm talking about more outside of Europe here. Most in outside of Europe will include housing allowance as well, so you don't pay for your house, or you have a stipend of as much, a certain amount, and then you can pay over that if you want, or under that, and often keep the extra cash. They should pay flights. Different schools offer different things, but the minimum you'd want is for yourself, but even better if it's for your dependents as well. And most schools outside of Europe offer a 13th month as well, which is kind of like a pension. You can keep that and save it, which is also really helpful. And also one last thing to check, this was a surprise to me in a recent school, holidays. Sometimes teachers are actually factored into work in the holidays. I've heard about that very recently in a school, even where I am now, that they have to work a certain amount of days and it's unpaid. So, so I would check that. I've never had that experience, but that's well worth checking as well. And just so you know, I will add this into the chat, this whole PowerPoint, so you have all these things for yourself. So I know I'm speaking quite quickly and our time is quite short. So my chapter 6. So chapter 6, I detail international teacher types, all the different people who come abroad. And the following chapter, I have written accounts from these different people who come abroad. One that I haven't really touched upon is teacher parents. If you're a teacher in the school and also a parent, this can be wonderful. And you can know your child is settled in and it can be great. Or it can be a little bit more tricky because perhaps you're on, the move is difficult for your child and you see your child walking alone in the playground. It can have a bit of both to it. And I've experienced both. The upside of being a teacher parent, of course, is that you all go to school together, you all come home together, you all have the same holidays. You don't have to worry about any of that. You might also know the teachers really well and the school and how it works really well and feel really comfortable that your child's in that school. So I would say overall, the offer must be considered by everyone, all people involved in the school who are going to move to a new school, and that's even your children. Of course, they're not going to have the end say in what you do, and you're going to do the right for your family. But it's well worth involving them, showing them the website, showing them things they can do. My example was when we moved to Poland, I showed the snow, and my daughter had never seen snow before, so this was a big pulling factor for her. We go on Google Maps as well. Have a look even around the area. You can actually zoom into the street and the school and walk around the area and check it yourself. What must also really be considered is the standard of the school if you're going to put your children in there. That's something you really got to think about, and the language that's generally around the school if you want them to be able to really make friends. It helps them. And look, also you can join Facebook groups to find out more about the school and more about the country. And also if you're a parent, again, join Facebook groups that are parents groups so you can ask questions there. And I would say for anyone moving to a new school, find out the demographics of the other staff members there. You can find it quite easily, usually on the website. They'll have everyone who's working there. You can see the photos, etc. But if you are a family and you're seeing very, very young staff at the school, it might be more difficult for you if you want your kids to have friends with other staff members. My favourite school I've ever worked at had a huge ranging demographic from 20-year-olds just out of college up to 65-year-olds. And that was awesome because we fit in everywhere. It was a really fun place to be. So that's the end of my presentation. I have my information there again for you. This QR code will link straight to my website, which has got everywhere you can get the book. I hope it's been helpful. Like I said, we will put into the chat this presentation. If you have any more questions, please don't hesitate to contact me on Twitter or through my website. Thank you very much.
Okay. Well, thank you, Jess, for elaborating on the steps to helping teachers move abroad. This was very helpful, and it also brought back a lot of memories of what you should do and what things were really helpful for me when I had to move abroad. So everyone can hear me, right? Yes? Okay. My name is Amy Melton. I am married, and I just haven't had the time to change my name, so that's why it's in parentheses, Perry Morin. We are going through the green card process. So we haven't had the time to actually physically change my name. So that's another story and another time. So for my journey, I started teaching in the United States, and I felt that I really wanted something more, and I knew like in my blood that I really wanted to live abroad, and I just didn't know where to start. So I had a friend who lived in China. She connected me to some websites, recruitment websites, and that's how I found my first job in Shanghai. So I did live abroad for 7 years. I worked in China, I've worked in Vietnam, and then I worked in Egypt. And then with COVID, things changed and plans have changed unexpectedly. So we moved back to the United States, my husband and I. So I actually went from an expat lifestyle to now a repatriate. So on my note, I'd like to talk about reverse culture shock. It's kind of been like a term that's been around for a while, and sometimes people are like, what is reverse culture shock? And it is a true thing. It has happened. And we go to a host country and we experience ourselves culture shock, but we don't really talk too much about what it's like to move back to your home country and experience the reverse of it. So when we go home, we just are very excited because it's our familiar place, whether it's the state you move back to or to another state, but it's our country per se. It's your familiar place that you've just known and grew up around. So you're like, yeah, this is easy. This is going to be a piece of cake. I'm going to adjust so well. But turns out things just completely throw you for a curve. So I always say there's like 4 phases that people will experience when they go through reverse culture shock. And I would say the euphoria phase, where you're like excited to go back, to go see your friends and family, eat the food that you kind of missed for many years that you couldn't get abroad, getting to hang out with people you haven't seen for many years because you're like, I only got to see them maybe once a year during the summer, during the holiday. And then you kind of transition to the phase of frustration. Things are starting to get annoying. You're like, things that you didn't see before you left, now you came back, you're like, it's like the little things that would frustrate you. For me, it was driving. Like I was so used to, having a taxi or an Uber or a bus that was provided by my school that would take us to work. And now I'm like, I have to get my own car, I have to drive, and I have to learn all these rules, get my new driver's license. And it's just little like things that just irritate you. You're like, it seems easy, but it's the frustration behind of having to do it all over again. Some things that are like more costly than what you're expecting overseas. It's, for example, car insurance. I haven't thought about that for years, and now I have to pay car insurance. You kind of go into the phase of readjusting, understanding that things are the way they are, and it's up to you to handle those emotions and dealing with the things that you're so used to overseas. It's kind of quite different to how you are back home. So you're kind of like, all right, I'm here and this is my new chapter and I have to, make the best of it in certain situations. And it is a realization that can happen. And then you're in that final phase, like, all right, I'm accepting where I am now, whether it might be for a short period of time back home, and maybe I will go back back overseas, wherever I want to go next. And it's just to that point where you're just reflecting what you've learned, the experiences you've learned overseas, learning maybe new skills that you're like, oh, I have this opportunity now, I can do this here in my home country. So that's what the 4 stages or the 4 phases. As what we go through reverse culture shock, we are kind of, like I said, coming home to somewhere that is home, but it feels foreign to us. And then you kind of have that internal anxiety that you might be facing with you're not fitting in anymore, or people have changed, and the people you kind of grew up with, they have moved on with their lives, or they have different priorities than what you guys were when you first were living at home. And I also think for me, it was my identity. I pretty much restarted my life overseas. So that was where my identity started. And then when I came back, I felt like, is this who I am? And I'm trying to figure out if to bring my international identity back into the country of the United States. Because people are like, where are you from? And it's hard for me to actually say I am from the United States, because my life has been in different places around the world, and those pieces belong from that country. And it's just like a whole global perspective. And it's very hard to explain to people who have never left. And I think that was some hardship that I had to face. Being overwhelmed is another key factor. Like what I was telling earlier about commuting and driving, I feel like that was one of my struggles here, is just the experience of driving again, even though I've driven since I was 14, 15 years old. But it's like learning how to ride your bicycle again. So it's one of those adjustments that you have to face and deal with. And reestablishing the routines. Work is different, and your social life is completely different. You're trying to make new friends. You're trying to make connections. You're trying to go out and venture the city or town that you were living in, or in a new city and town that you're in that country. And I think that's a very difficult thing to experience. So it's those overwhelming feelings that you kind of feel when you're like in that cloud of confusion and disorientation when you're back in your home country. So old places, I was excited. Funny story, I was really excited to come back and eat at a restaurant called Olive Garden. Olive Garden is a chain restaurant, but growing up, I used to love going there, getting the unlimited breadsticks and the salad. And I was so excited to take my husband to Olive Garden, and we were eating, and I was like, this doesn't taste like it used to be. Like it's just something off. And I think that's one of the things that pops up. It's like you're so excited to go back to things that you're used to or was used to, and it's just not the same experience. The taste palette has changed, and things are just different now. And I was saying earlier that it's a struggle factor to connect with family and friends, especially those who have never left, or they're like always the fear mongering aspect of like, you should not go there if you're going to get think bad things happen there, and petty theft. I'm just like, you have to, let it roll off your shoulders and your back and just say like, yeah, you have to put yourself in their shoes. Like they have never had that experience. So it's trying to find that balance of, trying to help them understand, but then yet to, just kind of let them say what they want to say. So that kind of inspired me to write my book, The Journey of Repatriation. And this is my personal journey. And I reached out to a few friends and colleagues and people that I've known that actually repatriated back to their home country. I asked for their feedback. They actually inspired me to write some more chapters in my book and things I didn't even think about. And I incorporated their quotes, what they had, their little personal stories into my book. So I thought that was a real fun thing to do with them and collaborate. And I wanted to write about reverse culture shock. I don't recall reading much about it in books, and I really wanted to write this book to help others who might experience it when they move back to their home country. And as I know, things can be tough moving back home, but there are advantages to coming back home. There are things like seeing family and friends. Like I get to fly straight, like a 2-hour flight to see my family back in Florida. I can go visit them a few times a year instead of once a year. Things I can go to Walmart or Target and buy things right off the bat instead of having to buy a stock full of things, take back with me to my country in a suitcase, because I would fill 2 suitcases of things to come back overseas. And I work in an international school too in the United States. So I really felt that helped me with my transition and dealing with reverse culture shock, because I have a global perspective now. I have a global mindset of things. I can bring those ideas, the techniques, the strategies I learned overseas, I can bring them back into my home country in this international school setting. And we do have a lot of international teachers. So that community and networking has really helped with the transition. And we're like having all these stories that we talk about our experiences. And I have friends who we have mutual friends. We actually worked at different schools, and then we worked at same schools at different times of the year. And then we ended up being in this school in Houston. And it's just funny how small the world really is, especially in an international teaching setting. And I think working in an international school is great. There are plenty of them in the United States. It's just finding the right fit or the opportunity that comes to you. So there are top pros to working in an international school back in your home country. So you can find my book on Amazon. There is a link, and I added the QR code at the bottom of my book. I do have a Facebook group called Finding Home After Abroad, Reverse Culture Shock Support. I have people from around the world, people who are added that are still living abroad, but they're sharing their experiences while living abroad, or they might contemplate whether or not to move back home. So this is a really good open community to share your thoughts, your feelings, your experiences, your questions. So that's why I felt like this would have been a good start to kind of build that community. And you can email me and find me on Instagram, and I have my LinkedIn. So, but I want to thank you. Sorry for the technical issues, and I really appreciate the time. So I'm done with my presentation, so I'm going to turn it back over to Kelly and Jess to do the Q&A section.